My name is Carol, and I've always been the kind of woman who likes to know exactly where she's standing. An organized schedule, carefully measured responses, emotions stored away in safe compartments. My life worked because I worked this way, control. Nothing out of place. Nothing catching me off guard. And definitely nothing capable of throwing me off balance because of someone I didn't know. That day, all I needed was the car. Just that. The morning was already off kilter. Too many commitments, too little patience. When the engine failed in the middle of the street. A metallic hiccup. Dry. Final. I pulled over, breathing deeply, hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly, feeling irritation rise hot in my chest. It wasn't drama. It was frustration. I didn't have time for setbacks. The repair shop appeared as a practical solution. Discreet. The kind you only notice when you need it. I parked carefully, adjusted my bag on my shoulder, and got out ready to solve, explain, pay, and leave. That was when Iris Valenka entered my field of vision. There was no theatrical impact, no lightning bolt, no shock. It was something subtler, and therefore more dangerous. As if the entire space had quietly rearranged itself around her. Iris was leaning over another car, focused, sleeves rolled up, grease-marked hands working with calm precision. Her solid body occupied the space without asking permission. She didn't seem rushed or distracted. She seemed present, fully there. When she straightened up and looked at me, something inside me lost its rhythm. Iris's gaze was direct, clear, free of excess curiosity or forced friendliness. She simply saw me. And that was enough to make me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was low, steady, not seductive, not rehearsed. Still, my stomach reacted before my thoughts did. A brief, unexpected tightening that made me inhale deeply, as if I'd forgotten how to breathe. "She's just the mechanic," I told myself. "You just need the car." I began explaining the problem, speaking faster than usual, while Iris moved closer to the hood. Against my will, I noticed the way she moved. Every gesture had purpose. Every touch seemed to know exactly where it belonged. Organized as always, I tried to keep the conversation safely grounded in logic. But something in me already knew, even without wanting to admit it, that this wasn't an ordinary encounter. I had arrived expecting efficiency. What I found was a presence that quietly unraveled everything I thought I had under control. And although I didn't know it yet, that broken-down car had just opened a crack in my perfectly organized life. A crack called Iris Valenka. The repair shop had its own rhythm. It wasn't chaotic, but it wasn't silent either. There was the metallic sound of tools, the sharp click of a part being adjusted, an old radio playing softly somewhere in the background. Everything seemed to move at a different pace from mine, as if the world inside those walls wasn't in a hurry. I stood beside the car, bag hanging from my shoulder, posture far too rigid for someone waiting on a quote. I watched Iris approach calmly, without asking for the keys, without rushing, like she already knew that space now belonged to her. I handed them over when she extended her hand, and the brief brush of our fingers was enough to make me painfully aware of my own body. She opened the hood and leaned in, studying the engine carefully. The sun hit her at an angle, casting shadows along her strong arms, highlighting the contained strength in her movements. It was impossible not to notice. Not because she wanted to be seen, but because she simply was whole, naturally occupying the space. I started talking again, explaining when the car had begun to fail, trying to keep my voice steady, professional. Iris listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, eyes focused, expression serious yet calm. When she finally spoke, it was with few words, objective, precise, like someone who didn't need to impress. She said she needed to hear the engine running. Asked me to start the car. I complied, sliding back into the driver's seat, my heart beating slightly faster than it should have. When the engine sputtered again, I heard Iris make a low sound of understanding, almost a murmur, as if she were speaking directly to the machine. She asked me to turn it off. I stepped out again and stood there, unsure where to place my hands. Iris wiped her fingers on a rag and looked at me once more. Her gaze wasn't invasive or evaluative. It was direct, honest. That disarmed me more than any attempt at flirting would have. She said it wasn't anything serious, but it would take some time. A few hours, maybe more, depending on the part. She asked if I could wait or if I preferred to come back later. Waiting wasn't in my plans. Nothing that day was. Even so, I heard myself say that I could stay. The answer came out before the careful analysis I usually relied on. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't want to leave yet, even though I didn't have the courage to admit that. Not even to myself. Iris nodded as if it were the most natural thing in the world and pointed to a plastic chair near the wall. She said I could sit there if I wanted. I thanked her and sat down, crossing my legs, trying to reclaim my sense of control. As she returned to work, I noticed my attention following her effortlessly. Every movement was precise. Every gesture seemed intentional. There was no rush but no hesitation either. Iris knew exactly what she was doing, and there was something deeply reassuring about that. I, who always needed to understand everything, plan everything, began for the first time in a long while to accept the strange sensation of simply observing, of not leading, of not controlling. And as the smell of oil and metal blended with the warm morning air, a quiet truth began to take shape inside me. I was no longer there just because of the car. Iris moved through the shop again with the same natural ease as before, as if my presence changed nothing, and at the same time as if she knew exactly that I was watching. She walked among the tools, selected parts, leaned once more over my car's engine with an intimacy that made me keenly aware of how little I belonged to that world. And still I couldn't look away. Iris's hands drew attention effortlessly. Not because of the grease or the obvious strength, but because of their precision. Each movement had a clear beginning and end, as if her body followed its own logic. Steady, quiet, certain. These were hands that solved problems. That didn't hesitate. That didn't ask for permission. Struck me in an unexpected way. I had always admired competence. Maybe because I had spent my entire life trying to be flawless. But what Iris carried was different. There was no rigidity in her. No tension. There was confidence. A calm confidence. Almost too comfortable for someone like me, who was used to controlling even the tone of her own voice. She straightened up for a moment, wiped her hands on the rag tucked into her coveralls, and took a sip of water. When our eyes met again, I felt that same discreet tightening in my stomach. It wasn't nervousness. It was recognition. Something silent passing between us without needing a name. Iris asked if I worked nearby. I nodded and answered automatically, talking about the office, the hours, the routine. As I spoke, I realized she was truly listening, not just waiting for her turn to respond. Her attentive gaze, her head slightly tilted, as if every detail mattered. When I finished, she mentioned that she had taken over the shop on her own a few years earlier. She said it without exaggerated pride, without self-pity. Just as a fact. I swallowed hard. Owner of her own shop. Her own space. Her own life. Something shifted inside me. I, who had always measured success by titles, numbers, and external recognition, found myself deeply impressed by a woman in a dark coverall, grease-stained hands, and a presence that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Iris returned to the engine and explained what was likely wrong. She spoke simply, clearly, without diminishing my intelligence or testing me. It was a conversation between equals. That disarmed me more than any compliment ever could. As she spoke, I caught myself imagining what it would be like to stand on the other side of that certainty. To know exactly who you are, where you stand, what you want. And for the first time that day, I realized my interest was no longer just curiosity. It wasn't even purely physical attraction, though she was there, quietly pulsing beneath the surface. It was admiration. And I knew that was even more dangerous. Time started behaving strangely inside the shop. It didn't fly, but it didn't drag either. It simply happened, like each minute had decided to linger a little longer than usual. Iris was working on the car, but the conversation began without planning, almost by accident. A simple comment about the heat. Short reply from me. Then another. And when I realized it, we were talking about things that had nothing to do with the engine open in front of us. She asked if I'd always been this organized. Not as criticism, genuine curiosity. I gave a small laugh and said yes, explaining that organization was my way of keeping things running. My life, my work, my head. Iris listened, then said she'd never been able to live like that. She preferred to feel the day before trying to control it. That should have sounded chaotic to me. Didn't. On the contrary, something in the way she spoke, calm and unguarded, made my shoulders relax without me noticing. I told her I liked lists, planning, knowing exactly what to expect. She said she likes small surprises, the kind that don't warn you but don't hurt either. We fell silent for a few seconds after that. A silence far too comfortable for two strangers. Iris went back to the engine, but she kept talking. She told me she learned mechanics from her father, and after he passed, she decided to stay, to take over the shop. She said a lot of people doubted her. Some still do. But cars don't lie. They either work or they don't. And she knows how to listen when something's wrong. A smile rose on my face without me deciding to smile. I answered by talking about my job, about the too clean environment, the predictable meetings, the measured words. I didn't complain. I simply described it. Iris said it sounded exhausting to live so tightly adjusted. Not as criticism. As an observation. I wanted to disagree. I swear I did. But the truth slipped out before control could stop it. Maybe a little. She looked at me over the hood, hands braced, body slightly leaning forward. Her gaze wasn't invasive. It was attentive, present. Like that small confession had been noticed and respected. She said sometimes things break precisely to force us to stop. The sentence was simple, almost casual. Still, it cut through me in a way I didn't expect, like she wasn't only talking about the car. A quiet warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't explicit desire. It was something deeper, slower. The sensation of being seen beyond the organized surface I always offered the world. The conversation could have ended there. It didn't need to continue. The car was still being repaired. I could have stayed quiet. I could have gone back to my phone. Could have reclaimed control. But I didn't. I stayed there, talking with Iris Valenka about things that didn't need to be said. About paths we choose without knowing why. About the strange feeling of when something slips off plan, yet still feels right. And at some point in that unpretentious exchange, I understood something with unsettling clarity. I wasn't just waiting for the car anymore. I was staying because of her. I've always been attentive to my body. To posture, gestures, the appropriate distance between me and other people. I knew exactly how much space to take up, and how much to leave open. Maybe that's why I noticed the instant Iris came closer than she had before. She needed a tool that was resting along the side of the car, right where I was seated. I stood automatically to make room, organized even in that. The movement was almost choreographed, and still it failed. When I reached out to move my bag out of the way, her fingers touched mine. It wasn't a jolt. There was no startle. It was brief, warm contact, too precise to ignore. Her skin was firm, slightly rough, real. I felt it travel up my arm like a silent current, reaching a place inside me that didn't usually respond like that. Iris didn't pull her hand back immediately. The space between the touch and the withdrawal was tiny, but long enough for something to settle. When she finally moved away, she did it naturally. No apology. No awkwardness. Like she understood it didn't need explaining. I, on the other hand, had to take a deep breath. My body reacted before my mind could organize a coherent thought. A discrete heat spread across my chest, drifting lower, slow, dangerous. It wasn't obvious arousal. It was awareness. Of my skin. Of my pulse. Of her being too close. Iris kept doing what she was doing, but I noticed her jaw was slightly tighter. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to give her away. That sent an unexpected shiver through me. I sat back down, crossing my legs more tightly than necessary. Suddenly the chair felt too small. The shop felt more enclosed. The air heavier. She made a comment about the part she needed to replace. I answered, but my voice came out lower. Lower. Like it had passed through a different filter inside me. Iris lifted her gaze for a second. Quick, direct. Our eyes met again. And this time there was no neutrality. There was recognition. Neither of us said anything. There was no need. The touch had spoken for us. An unspoken warning that something had been crossed. An invisible line, but final. I'd always thought desire was loud. That it announced itself with urgency and rush. What I felt there was the opposite. The kind of attraction that doesn't ask permission, but also doesn't invade. Simply settles in. And while Iris went back to the engine, hands steady sure, I understood something that unsettled me. That hadn't been an accident. And neither of us wanted to pretend it was. After the touch, something changed in the way I saw everything around me. The shop was no longer just a temporary place where I waited for a repair. It became a territory of contrast. On one side me, neutral clothes, structured bag, a life carefully organized into predictable blocks. On the other, Iris. Grease-stained coveralls, loose movements, an existence that seemed to hold itself up without so many restraints. I watched that world more closely. The walls weren't decorated. They were functional. Tools hung in practical order, marks of use everywhere. Nothing tried to look like what it wasn't. Everything had history. Everything had purpose. I thought of my quiet apartment, the objects chosen to match, the clean aesthetic I called comfort. Here, comfort was something else. Iris moved like someone who belonged to that space. Not just because she owned the shop, but because her body had learned the language of that place. Each step was firm. Each decision direct. No hesitation. And that made me notice how much I hesitated myself, even when I pretended I was certain. She mentioned a difficult customer, another woman who doubted everything Iris explained. She laughed as she told it, without bitterness. Said she was used to it. Some people only believe it when a man says the exact same thing. It hit a familiar discomfort inside me. How many times had I doubted before trusting? How many times had I linked competence to an image that didn't include women like Iris? I felt shame, not heavy, not paralyzing. The kind that doesn't freeze you but rearranges you. Almost without realizing it, I told her about my work. About the glass office, the rigid deadlines, the conversations too polite. Iris listened in silence, then said it all sounded very clean. Very far from the ground. Not as criticism. Like someone describing a landscape she'd never needed to live in. Then she asked if I liked it. The question hung between us for a few seconds. I could have answered automatically. Could have said yes, said it was what I chose, that it worked. Instead, I was honest. I said I liked the feeling of control. That I felt safe knowing what to expect. Iris nodded like she understood perfectly. She said for her, too much control felt like running out of air. She needed to feel things happening to feel alive. Two women. Two worlds. Neither wrong. And still, something fit in a strange way. Like unlikely pieces forming a new shape. I didn't want to be Iris. And I didn't want her to be like me. What attracted me was precisely the distance between us. That delicate abyss where her gaze met mine without judgment. The car was almost ready. I could tell by the way Iris moved. Finishing, checking, wiping her hands. Part of me prepared to leave, to return to the organized life I knew so well. Another part, quiet and newly awake, didn't want to. And for the first time in a long time, I realized it wasn't her world that scared me. It was how much I wanted to cross that difference, without knowing exactly who I would be on the other side. Iris closed the hood with almost ceremonial care, as if she were finishing something bigger than a simple repair. She wiped her hands on the rag one last time and took a deep breath before turning toward me. The car was ready. I knew it. And still I didn't move. She explained what had been done, the cost, the time, everything clearly. I listened, nodded, responded on autopilot. My attention was fixed elsewhere. On the way she watched me while she spoke. There was no rush to finish. No urgency to say goodbye. When I completed the payment, I slung my bag over my shoulder and thanked her. It was the logical moment to leave. The correct moment. My organized life demanded it. Iris nodded, but didn't step away. She said I could test the car right there. That she liked to be sure everything was right before letting it go. I agreed and got in. Started the engine. It ran perfectly. Quiet. Obedient. Predictable. Exactly the way I liked things. I turned it off and got out again. That's when Iris said something that wasn't in the script. She mentioned she still had some time before closing the shop that day. That she'd made fresh coffee in the back. She said it casually, like someone offering something simple. No visible intention. No expectation. She asked if I wanted some. The question wasn't big. It didn't carry explicit double meaning. And still I felt its weight. The invitation wasn't about coffee. It was about staying. About not leaving right away. About stretching the space that had formed between us. My first instinct was to decline. I'd already rehearsed the polite response in my head. But something stopped me. Maybe the way Iris waited, silent, unpressuring. Maybe the fact that she didn't seem to need me to say yes. Or maybe it was simply the quiet desire to stay a few more minutes in a place where I didn't have to decide anything. Accepted. We went into the small room at the back of the shop. The coffee was simple, strong, served in mismatched cups. I sat on a wooden chair, feeling the contrast with the environments I was used to. Iris leaned against the counter, close enough for me to feel her presence, far enough not to invade me. We drank in silence for a few seconds. She commented that I didn't seem like someone who usually accepted invitations like that. I smiled, recognizing the truth. I said maybe that day was full of exceptions. Iris raised an eyebrow slightly, like she liked the answer. She said sometimes we need to break our own routine to remember we're alive. It didn't sound like advice. Sounded like fact. As I held the warm cup between my hands, I realized I wasn't thinking about my next appointment. Or the time. Or my mental to-do list. I was there. Present. For the first time in a long while. And even though I didn't yet have the courage to admit it out loud, something inside me already knew. That coffee wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something I didn't yet know how to name. The coffee was gone, but neither of us moved. The empty cup was still warm in my hands when I realized my entire body had shifted states. My shoulders, always tense, were relaxed. My breathing, once shallow, now slow and steady. I couldn't remember the last time I'd sat in silence with someone without feeling the need to fill it. Iris was the first to break it. She asked if I was late for somewhere. The question came without pressure, almost like permission to leave if I wanted to. I shook my head slowly and said no. Technically I was. But in that moment the truth was different. I was exactly where I needed to be. She watched me for a few seconds longer than usual. Not insistently. Carefully. As if she were weighing something that didn't concern only me, but her as well. I felt a light tightening in my chest. Not anxiety. Anticipation. That's when fear appeared. Not as panic, but as a familiar presence. That internal alert that always surfaced when something threatened to slip out of control. I knew that feeling well. Kept me safe. Kept me from making mistakes. But it also kept me distant. I realized, with uncomfortable clarity, that the desire forming there wasn't just physical. It wasn't fleeting curiosity. It was the urge to get closer. To know. To cross a line I had always kept intact. Iris noticed my shift in posture. Her body adjusted. Not to pull away, but not to advance either. That touched me more than any bold move would have. She was giving me space to choose. She said I seemed like someone who thought too much. The comment came with a half smile, no irony. I agreed. I'd always thought too much. Planned too much. Protected myself too much. I said some choices came with complicated consequences. Iris nodded. Said she knew. Not everyone is ready to deal with what they feel when they feel it. The words didn't come as judgment. They came as understanding. Silence returned, but now it was different. Answer. loaded with what wasn't being said. I felt the impulse to stand up and leave, to thank her for the coffee and return to the life I controlled so well. I also felt the opposite impulse. To look at Iris and admit that something there was cutting through me in a new way. I stayed. I didn't say anything. I simply stayed. And in that small, almost invisible choice, I understood something fundamental about myself. Desire wasn't scaring me because it was intense. It was scaring me because it was real. Iris stepped a little closer. Not enough to touch me. Just enough for me to feel her warmth. She asked softly if I was okay. I nodded. I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't safe. I wasn't in control. But I was alive. And for the first time, that felt more important than any plan I'd ever made. It was already dark when I realized I'd been there far too long to be just a customer. The shop was nearly silent now. The radio had been turned off, the tools put away, the street outside growing empty. The yellowed light cast soft shadows along the walls, making everything feel more intimate. Closer. Iris partially closed the gate, not as someone ending something, but as someone protecting a space. She walked back toward me with the same calm as always, but now there was something else there. A more careful attention. A near-reverent respect for what was forming. She asked if I wanted to leave. The question sounded simple but carried weight. It wasn't about the car. It was about me. About what I was ready to do with what I was feeling. I looked at her for a few seconds before answering. For the first time that day, I didn't look for the right answer. I looked for the true one. I said I didn't want to leave yet. Iris nodded slowly, as if she'd hoped for that, but hadn't counted on it. She stepped a little closer. Now we were close enough for the silence between us to feel almost tangible. My heart beat harder, not with urgency but recognition. She asked if I was comfortable, if it wasn't too much. The genuine concern in her voice dismantled me. There was no rush, no demand, just presence. I said I was afraid. Iris smiled softly. Said fear wasn't a problem. Pretending you feel nothing, that was the problem. Hit me deeply. I'd spent my entire life pretending certain things didn't affect me. That I didn't want more than what was predictable. She extended her hand. Didn't touch me right away. Just left it there, open. A silent invitation. My body answered before reason did. I placed my hand in hers. The contact was simple. Final. Iris didn't squeeze. Didn't pull. She just held it. Like that gesture alone said everything we still couldn't put into words. The warmth of her hand traveled up my arm, spreading a sense of belonging I didn't remember ever feeling before. She moved a little closer and I didn't pull back. Our faces were close. The world seemed to shrink around us. There was no urgency, no rush, only the quiet certainty that something was changing. When our lips met, it was gentle, low. A kiss that asked before advancing. That respected every boundary, even as it crossed them. My entire body responded, not with anxiety, but with a calm, almost emotional surrender. It wasn't just desire. It was recognition. When we pulled apart, I stayed there, my forehead resting against hers, breathing the same air. Iris smiled that calm smile that had already become dangerous for me. She said nothing needed to be decided that night. There were no promises, no obligations, just truth. I nodded. I didn't need guarantees in that moment. I only needed that rare feeling of being exactly where I was meant to be. I left the shop some time later, the car running perfectly. But I knew, with impossible clarity, that it wasn't the engine that had been adjusted that day. Something inside me had slipped out of alignment. And strangely, it had never felt more in the right place. I drove home more slowly than someone who had always hated wasting time. The car was flawless, quiet, obedient, responding exactly as it should. Every gear shifting at the right moment. Every turn smooth and secure. Everything working. And still, something inside me was off balance, like I was trying to fit a newer version of myself into a life that had suddenly become too old. I parked in the garage and stayed there for a few minutes, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing deeply. I didn't turn the engine off right away. Iris came to mind too easily. Her steady gaze. The calm that didn't ask for explanations. The way she never tried to convince me of anything. Never promised, never demanded. She had simply been there. I went upstairs, and my orderly silence welcomed me as always. Everything clean. Everything in place. Each object exactly where I had left it. I walked through the rooms with a strange sensation, like I was visiting a space that had always been mine, but now felt too small for everything I was carrying inside. I changed clothes, made something simple to eat, followed my routine almost by reflex. But there were pauses, small breaks, moments when my mind drifted back to the shop, to the smell of oil mixed with coffee, to the yellow light at the end of the day, to the brief touch that still felt imprinted on my skin. And the strangest part was this. I didn't feel guilty. I had always been quick to analyze risks, anticipate consequences, protect myself before anything could unsettle me from the inside. But that night there was no regret. There was curiosity. A calm desire to understand what had opened inside me without asking permission. I picked up my phone more than once. Unlocked the screen. Locked it again. There was no number saved. No promise of another meeting. And still, Iris's presence felt available, as if it didn't depend on messages or guarantees. I went to bed earlier than usual. Sleep took its time. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my body awake. Not on alert, but in expectation. I thought about the control I had always exercised over my life. About how it had kept me safe for so long. And I thought, too, about how only a few hours had been enough for me to realize that maybe safety wasn't the only thing I wanted to feel. I made no promises. I drew no plans. I didn't try to anticipate anything. For the first time in a long while, I allowed the next day to exist without being fully defined. Before falling asleep, a simple certainty settled inside me. Quiet and firm. I knew where that shop was. I knew what time it opened. And I knew that next time I wouldn't be going there just because of the car. And now I want to hear from you. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters, because this story is far from over. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing how far these emotions are traveling.